Back to the Ave Maria Press Professional Development Webinar Series. In today's webinar, Tyler Blanski will share practical ways to help fathers encounter God right where they are and to awaken the spiritual potential hidden in the routines of suburban life. My name is Erin Pierce. I am the publicist at Ave Maria Press. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions. Questions can be sent to our presenter using the questions box on the GoToWebinar panel that you see here, and I'll read as many of those as possible at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and I will send you a link to the recording tomorrow via email, and you are free to share this with your parish, colleagues, friends, family. With that, I would like to welcome and introduce our presenter today. Tyler Blanski is the author of Find Your Fight, Rugged Wisdom for Faithful Dads Who Refuse to Settle, and owner of the Minnesota Catholic, a full-color lifestyle magazine for the Catholic families, parishes, and schools of the Twin Cities area. He earned a bachelor's degree in Christian Studies from Hillsdale College and a Master of Divinity degree from Nashatoa House Theological Seminary. Perhaps that's
Nashotah
close.
House.
Okay.
A small
Blanski.
Anglican seminary.
Small. Okay, great. Blanski's the author of 3 other books: An Immovable Feast with Ignatius Press, When Donkeys Talk, Zondervan, and Mud and Poetry with Fresh Air Books. He has also written for Touchstone Magazine, Christianity Today, Relevant Magazine, CNN, ABC News, HuffPost, Crisis Magazine, Catholic Exchange, The Catholic Gentleman, and many more. And he lives in Minnesota with his family. Tyler, thank you so much for being with us today.
Erin, thank you. It's just wonderful to be with you.
Oh, well, thank you. We feel the same. I'm going to go ahead and make you presenter.
Sounds good. Let me share my screen here. Can you guys see that okay?
We can see it. With that, I'm going to let you take it from here.
All right, let me shrink that down in case that's in the way. All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad that you can hop on this call. I admire you for doing it. If you're in ministry, I bet your schedule, you're just crazy busy and juggling to get things done. So to do anything just to, fan the flame and think outside the box, I think that's super cool. And it's a privilege to be able to link up with you in this way. Today, I'm going to be talking about finding holiness in the everyday, and in particular, ministering to the tired suburban dad. Let me see why this is. There we go. Here's a brief bird's eye view of our itinerary for today. We're going to start with the paradox of the American dad, zoom in on my story, actually, since I know it so well and it's such a wild and crazy tale. Then zoom in briefly on the father's vocation in a pretty unique biblical perspective and historic perspective, and then dive into a couple practical parish solutions and opportunities for friendship that will help men find their fight, renew their energy, and not give up. I want to begin with what I call the paradox of the American dad. And what I mean by that is G.K. Chesterton kind of frames a lot of my thinking on the beauty and purpose of a paradox, in that it combines furious opposites. For Chesterton, a paradox is a seeming contradiction that reveals a deeper underlying truth. So, for example, in orthodoxy, he's talking about how Christianity often combines things that just seem to be in total contradiction with each other. He says, quote, Christianity got over the difficulty of combining furious opposites by keeping them both and keeping them both furious. I just love that. St. Paul I think would love that too. And when he talks about fatherhood in 1 Corinthians 7:32, which in my thinking is one of the most important passages in scripture on the vocation of fatherhood and the paradox of fatherhood. St. Paul literally describes it, this vocation of dads, as a combination of furious opposites. He says, quote, "The unmarried man is anxious about the affairs of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about worldly affairs, how to please his wife, and his interests are divided." His interests are divided. A father is torn between two worlds. Marriage for St. Paul isn't just the mixing of sexual opposites, male and female, but the mixing of two seemingly contradictory purposes. A married man is torn between two worlds, how to please his wife, as St. Paul puts it, and how to please the Lord. He has to keep one foot in what Paul calls the affairs of the Lord, and another in what Paul calls worldly affairs. These things are not obviously united, and yet that's exactly where a dad finds himself. So the lived experience of this paradox, the paradox of the American dad, is seen in a variety of ways. Here's just a few. A Catholic dad has to make money to provide for his family, and yet be completely detached from money and indifferent to it. He has to provide for his family's material welfare and yet not become materialistic. That's walking a tightrope, to wake up every day where your number one job is to make money and provide for your family's material happiness, their well-being, and yet not lose sight that this is actually not your ultimate purpose at all. He has to become chaste through entering the marriage bed. And that's an uncomfortable contradiction, seemingly. There's not a lot of statues of saints or stained glass windows of men who are fathers. Barring St. Joseph, there are very, very few. And St. Joseph is a unique exception in that he was a father who never consummated his marriage. So the physical act that fathers must perform to even become fathers isn't something we usually associate with sanctity. And yet this is exactly the path for our chastity. A father must consecrate his life to the Lord by, almost ironically or counterintuitively, consecrating his whole life, body and soul, for better or for worse, richer or poorer, a total consecration to his wife, to Eve, really. He must become a slave to Christ, in Pauline language, a slave to Christ, while simultaneously, as Paul describes later, dying for his wife. Just as Christ gave up his life for the church, he must give up his life for his wife. And in America, and really anywhere, if he's seeking the welfare of his family, he has to pursue holiness while also pursuing life, liberty, and happiness. I don't know if you guys recognize this house and what it's from. One of my favorite movies, Father of the Bride, where George Banks, who's played by Steve Martin, he's just a great dad. And a lot of us growing up in America, we have movies that have really formed our idea of what the American dream is and what it means to be a dad. And I think without question, Father of the Bride is one of those iconic films of a dad who, he runs his own shoe business, very successful, loves playing basketball with his daughter in the driveway, and has this beautiful home and throws an enormous wedding party for his daughter. There's so many biblical symbols throughout this movie. But look at this house. This is an amazing house by American standards, and by global standards, this is quite affluent. This is something that I would say is a commendable pursuit for most men to pursue for their families, is building and providing for their wife and children a great home to come home to. It doesn't need to be this grand and this beautiful, but it's a worthy venture. And yet, is it a Christian venture? How are dads supposed to imitate Christ, who was a homeless man, by building a home? It seems like a paradox. So much so, a book that really, I would say, messed me up for a lot of my life. I read it when I was very young, by David Platt, is called Radical. And the subtitle of this book is Taking Back Your Faith from the American Dream. It's a beautiful book. It's a wonderful chastisement of people who have maybe become overly individualistic or materialistic. However, I think it is worth asking, what does the American dream, what is a home and a family and pursuing happiness and doing good in the community, what does that have to do with the Great Commission, when Christ commands us to go to the very ends of the earth, proclaiming the good news and making disciples? To answer that question, I want to share one dad's story, and it might as well be mine because it's a wild and upside down story. Having read David Platt's book, Radical, and I don't want to pick on him because he has a really good heart, and the goals of that book are very worthy. But I got it in my head as a young man. I'm now in my 40s, but in my teenage years, that to follow Christ, I had to be radical. So I grew dreadlocks. I worked at a organic foods co-op, and my dream was to live in the redwood trees and keep them from getting cut down. I was very concerned about global warming. And thank goodness my parents wouldn't hear of this. As soon as I went to Hillsdale College, I just fell in love with our Western heritage and learned so much. But I could never shake this idea that I couldn't just be a business major. In my mind, that would have been some kind of concession with worldliness. I had to be a Christian studies major. I had to follow Christ was to be radical. So I eventually cut off my dreadlocks, but then this is me in my 20s with long, crazy hair. I was an artist and a writer living in uptown Minneapolis, and I would do things like I had a project, a whole album in collaboration with other artists to raise awareness for homelessness, very involved at my church, eventually believed that God was calling me, I was not yet Catholic, to become an Anglican priest. That's how I eventually shaved my head and donned this black cassock and ended up at Nashotah House. And while there, that's when I met my wife. We fell in love, we got married. Anglican priests can do that. And in my studies, really discovered Catholicism. And it really shook me up. We ended up becoming Catholic, and that's what my last book, An Immovable Feast, tells that whole story. And of course, once you become Catholic, you're just open to life. And so right away, we have a baby. This is me in our seminary apartment with our brand new baby. And I graduated and I had no career prospects. I just spent 6 years building up a network in the Anglican community to start a church in the inner city, because in my mind, to follow Christ was radical. It would never be suburban. It would always have to be at least urban, if not, to the ends of the earth in Indonesia. And yet, becoming Catholic, I found, gosh, I just need to provide for my family. And we ended up, the local parish priest took me in. I was the director of religious education at a beautiful parish in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. This is St. Jerome's, an aerial view. Beautiful parish in rural Wisconsin, the suburbs really of Milwaukee. And gosh, I just loved it. It really changed me. And then we had another baby, and I had my dream job. I got to geek out about the Bible all day. I got to lead all the catechetical programs, from, early, pre-K all the way through adult ed. It was just so good. But there was a problem, which is that it was getting very difficult to provide for my family. And I'll never forget the day that I found my fight. And this is really the beginning of the book, Find Your Fight, was when our minivan broke down on the side of the road. My wife was just a mess. My kids were screaming in the back seat. And I knew I couldn't afford to fix the car. I couldn't afford to take my family out to Culver's, which is a popular restaurant out here. I couldn't even afford to save for braces if my kids ever needed braces. And that's when I realized that, strangely, following Christ, becoming Catholic, had not led me to Mongolia or even the inner city or to becoming a priest, but actually just to being a dad in the suburbs who needed to provide for his family and do real work. I had to get a job. So we launched a business. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. We moved into a very small apartment, 700 square foot apartment, to make ends meet. Lived on spaghetti and ramen for a year without any income until finally the business took off and I was at last able to provide for my family. And so I woke up one day having gone from being radical and following the homeless man, Jesus Christ, to the ends of the earth, so to speak, to being a boring dad within a very unradical life in the suburbs, a business owner, married. We eventually had a third kid. Now we have a fourth on the way. And for me, this gave me a lot of food for thought. I was no longer in full-time ministry. I was now working in the world all day, every day. And with what little free time I had to mow the yard or drive my kids to piano lessons or soccer practice. And it really shook me up. And it raises the question, is fatherhood and all that it entails, not the romantic version? Sometimes we talk about Saint Joseph and we visualize, and we can get into him later. It's the romantic vision of fatherhood where the rubber hits the road doesn't look very spiritual. And it raises questions like, can sainthood actually be suburban? Can you be Catholic and American at the same time? And what does happiness have to do with holiness? And how can faith speak to life's middle years? Because when you're young, like a lot of young people, you're full of, piss and vinegar. You're picking fights. You're just ready to go. As you get older, you have more responsibilities, and you just don't have the luxury of being so radical. What does it look like to follow Jesus as a dad? And I'm being very honest with you. Maybe some of you are dads yourselves or mothers, and you just won't relate to this at all. But so my story is admittedly strange, but you're stuck with me. I used to struggle to see fatherhood as a calling that I could fully embrace. And when I say fatherhood, I'm not just thinking of parenting or things that we often focus on as Catholics when we talk about fatherhood, like how to raise your kids up in the fear of the Lord, catechetical issues, leading the family in prayer. I'm thinking more the business meetings, the saving for that starter home, home maintenance, the appliances, buying a new car, saving for the family vacations or retirement. Regardless, I tacitly understood Jesus to be someone who was seriously against materialism and maybe even viewed social organization and cultural development itself, a civilization, as a distraction to the Christian life and not as a way to pursue Christ. This David Platt vision of taking back your faith from the American dream, although many people haven't read that particular book, the idea of the hippie Jesus is so ubiquitous and common it really does get in the way of our vision, I think, of what fathers are meant to do, and the holiness, the opportunity for evangelization and living out the vocation that God has called us to right here. This idea of the hippie Jesus leads many like me to believe the inner city is a nobler mission field than the suburbs. We often write off the suburbs and are, I think, unjustly critical of the people who live there. It often leads us to believe that poverty is inherently more virtuous than abundance. Irresponsibility is maybe more holy than responsibility. Some folks, even that Christ was anti-government and anti-civilization, or that being uneducated is somehow holier than being educated. At the end of the day, how could following Jesus possibly look like running a business, driving your kids to baseball practice, and mowing the lawn? Like, what does George Banks in Father of the Bride have to do with Saint Joseph? That's the question. So something I just want to lean into here as we think about how to minister to the tired suburban dad is to get real with ourselves as to, do we actually affirm what their vocation is and the challenges that they face, and how the deep riches that are waiting for fathers in the scriptures and in church tradition for them. It really does come down to this question of, was Jesus some kind of anti-establishment bohemian who preached freedom from the shackles of the production of and consumption of goods and services? Or was he a responsible family man, the devoted son of Mary and Joseph, a learned rabbi and a local business owner who, before he launched his public ministry, which was only the last 3 years of his life, was actually deeply invested in his community's welfare? I think the hidden years of Christ in Nazareth betray quite a bit that would affirm the role of and model how we are to actually live our faith. So in Find Your Fight, I really make the case carefully and have a lot of fun, making the case that settling down for a Catholic dad is not settling for less. It's getting off the bench. We just need to connect the dots for folks. And I want to give you guys a couple Bible verses that I think are unexpected, that are actually very crucial for any dad. The first one is Jeremiah 29, 4-7. Build houses and live in them, Jeremiah says to the exiles. Plant gardens and eat their fruits. Take wives and have sons and daughters, and increase there. Do not decrease. Seek the welfare of the city to which I have exiled you. Pray for it to the Lord, for upon its welfare your own welfare depends. This is one of my favorite passages of Scripture, and to me it is the most illustrative way of describing what the Great Commission looks like for normal people. When we think of holiness and sanctity, it's easy to look to the famous martyrs, missionaries to Africa or the distant islands, all worthy, amazing vocations. But God doesn't call most of us to something so extreme. And in fact, when we look at the history of the church, wherever we have gone, the Catholic Church has an amazing track record of bringing civilization wherever it goes and then putting down roots and building up. And I'm not just thinking of cathedrals, but hospitals, schools, homes, neighborhoods, parishes. This is how Catholics fulfill the Great Commission and bring the gospel to the ends of the earth. Another passage that's become very crucial for me in my ministry to dads, which I would describe as very organic and low-key, is what I call the forgotten prayer of the Father. It's from 1 Chronicles 4:10, one of the most misunderstood prayers in all of Scripture, and also one of the most overlooked. But it's it's in the middle of 8 chapters of genealogies. And so understandably, most people they don't come across this prayer because they're just not reading long genealogies. But for an ancient Jew, a genealogy was riveting and exciting. And this genealogy is actually a line of dads. It's a list of dads, one after the other, basically building up a story of covenant history, salvation history, through the lens of fathers and the families that they've had. And in the middle of this, there's a man, presumably a dad. It'd be really weird if he wasn't. There's a father who's crying out to God. And why would a prayer be randomly tucked into a middle of a genealogy? I truly believe in the book I go through this. This prayer is meant to be paradigmatic of the entire prayer of all Israel. They are a liturgical people, and throughout all of their genealogies, all of these dads were praying this prayer right here. Jabez implored God, "Oh, that you would bless me and extend my boundaries. May your hand be with me and protect me from harm." We're not going to have time. I'm just looking at the time to go through this. But this prayer is a foreshadowing of the Lord's Prayer in the New Testament. It is an echo of the prayer life of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and all Israel. This crying out to God. Think of Jacob, bless me, bless me. That's what dads do. But then extend my boundaries. Boundaries is not only spiritual, but actually physical. And the whole Old Testament could really, I would make the case, is God teaching his people how to live in covenant, not in theory, but in a real geographical place, the promised land. And they were meant to extend the boundaries of the promised land, to not only conquer spiritually, but physically, and to put down roots. This is also going back to the Garden of Eden, in that we're exiled from Eden, and east of Eden, we need land. We need a place of refuge to live the covenant life, which is exactly what the ancient Jews were doing. There's kind of a trend with a lot of Christians lately that Marxism or socialism is somehow more Christian than a republic like we have here in the United States. And I would just push against that a little bit. There's so many American virtues that when you peel them back, the layers actually are biblical virtues. Think of the virtue and priority in the American dream of home ownership or private property. If private property were not a Christian virtue, why would there be in one of the 10 commandments, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife? All of this is tying together. The Jews were learning how to live in covenant based on the principles of private property and the use of land together in covenant. I don't want to get too distracted. I get very excited about this prayer, but may your hand be with me. May God be. So as a dad praying this, not only is he praying representing all of Israel, he's also just praying as a father. Bless my family, broaden our borders, bring us great success, provide for us. May you be with us. May the hand of God be with us and protect us from harm. Protect us from harm. It's just a cool prayer for dads. We'll move on though. Okay, so I want to just suggest that fatherhood is not an obstacle to following Christ, but an opportunity. By the way, I don't know if any of you recognize this home. This is from Meet the Parents, a classic, an old movie. I'm probably dating myself. Maybe you're young and none of you have watched this fantastic classic. But Robert De Niro is the dad in this movie, and this is his home. And it's really interesting how he has built this place of refuge that the young bachelor dating his daughter stumbles into and fumbles his way around. The home is one of the characters in this story. Such a classic American home. The dad, Robert De Niro's character, has clearly done a good job of creating what I would call a happy home for his family. And I want to suggest that although happiness is not the same thing as holiness, Holiness is happy. If you were to bump into someone who was incorrigibly grumpy, just the most depressing person, always looking on the negative side, that person, you would have a hard time convincing me that they were truly holy, because the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, not grumpiness, bitterness, despair, frowning. We all have bad days. Holiness is not the same as happiness, but as you become holy, you are in the school of happiness. And the mission of a dad is not only for his family's eternal holiness, but also their happiness. Happiness is circumstantial. It is admittedly different than Christian joy. But a dad who, I think back when my van broke down on the side of the road, if I had said, you know, I understand that my family is in danger driving an old van that's falling apart all the time. I understand that I'll never be able to afford much for my kids, but none of it matters. Their happiness is not important to me, only their holiness. I feel like that would be a false dichotomy. I think a part of my vocation as a father is not just to provide for my family spiritually, but also physically. This is one reason why St. Joseph fled to Egypt, not only to physically protect his family, but to go somewhere where he could build up his carpentry business and actually provide for his family in a way that would work. A dad needs to bring the joy. He needs to show his family the joy of the Lord and how rich and sweet and root down deep it is to walk in union with God, to be intimate with the Almighty. And if we are not as dads doing that, we've totally missed the mark. But it's not separate from the physical world. This is the paradox, the Chestertonian paradox that St. Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians. Our interests are divided. It's intense. We're juggling a lot, but that's the job. All right, I'm looking at the clock. We're doing good. This vision, I think recently, in the wake of hippie Jesus ideas and things, we've really lost some of it. But historically, Christians understood this. Micah 4:4 is the last Bible verse I want to give to you today while we're flying high. It was the most quoted passage of scripture for the founding fathers in understanding liberty and the mission of this new country and the 13 colonies. Micah 4:4, but they shall sit, every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid. None shall make them afraid. Why was this passage quoted so often by the founding fathers? George Washington alone quotes it, I think, over 18 times between his addresses and his letters. It's because it implies ownership, private property, putting down roots, a place for a family to live in freedom and pursue the Lord, live in covenant relationship with God, and to not live in fear. I think that's so cool. Okay, so just to quickly, I know this is a sharp left turn, but having now kind of made my case for the situation dads find themselves in, where we go to mass and none of the saints in the stained glass windows are dads. There are hardly any throughout history that are fathers. And even St. Joseph, we can't really relate to him. He never consummated his marriage. We learn from him and we seek his intercession and we revere him, but we don't relate to him in a lot of fundamental ways. Where can we look to for the saints and in scripture? And how do we minister to dads really practically? Okay, I hope you guys recognize this house. It's from one of the best movies of all time, Home Alone, where John Hurt is the actor. He's the father figure. You know, I watched Home Alone every year as a kid, and it just got in my head, like, yeah, someday I'll have a house like that. And that never came to pass, but it's a beautiful vision of a dad who's done well. Okay, a couple of practical solutions. I think with preaching and teaching, I don't know what everyone's doing who's on this call, but I would say, just given my background, understandably, you won't be surprised that I'm saying this at this point, I would lean away um, from preaching about how to take back your faith from the American dream, but rather encourage men in the paradox that they're in of wanting to please the Lord and needing to please their wives and provide for their families, and give them a Jeremiah vision for their faith, to build houses and live in them, to take wives and raise children and seek the welfare of the city, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. This is one of the best ways that we can evangelize, and it starts with mowing your lawn. I would say remind them of what they're fighting for, give them a vision of heaven that is irresistible. The church has so much, the sacraments, the life of the Trinity right here brought down into the ordinary. I know as a dad, it's nuts getting my kids ready for Mass, especially when they were little. It's getting easier. But man, when you have 3 little kids and one's a baby and one's a toddler and the other's 3, and it's nuts. And they come staggering into Mass, and the last thing they need is a shouting match. They just need to be encouraged. They need to be built up. I would say, and I don't want to pick a fight, I hope this doesn't get misunderstood. As a convert, I was so excited about being open to life and the church's teaching on sexuality. I think I pretty much preached about NFP for years to our congregation. And I think I lost a lot of those couples. I think it would have done me good to maybe also highlight not just the limits and the fences, to use a Chesterton phrase, the fences around the playground, but to have reminded people that the marriage bed is meant to be a place not only of reproduction, but of joyful union and complicity. I really lean into this idea of complicity in the book, Find Your Fight, and how the sex act isn't just, it's a place of healing and nurturing, renewing the covenant. There's so much that goes there that we should celebrate and start conversations about in the appropriate contexts. I think also a lot of fatherhood ministries tend to focus on parenting. In Find Your Fight, I just don't talk a lot about parenting. I think most dads, especially of young dads of babies, they're not looking for parenting hacks. They're looking to survive. And their job is hurdling them into getting uncomfortable, growing in their careers, a bunch of civic responsibilities. And all of it, we need to remind them, is ultimately for the sake of the kingdom. We need to just embrace and cheer men on in all the boring ways dads can be a witness. I'm thinking very boring: coaching the little league team, mowing the lawn, doing good at work. That being said, I would say we never stop calling men out from the hedonistic, materialistic world that we live in. We need to be salt and light, and that means being different. I bring all these movies up, from Home Alone to Meet the Parents to Father of the Bride, just to remind us, like, these are worthy pursuits, but they can become idols, and we need to keep our priorities straight as we walk this tightrope, this paradox, to provide for our family's material welfare while remaining simultaneously detached from it. All right, one quick thing. I've just been really loving Saints Louis and Zelly Martin, the parents of the Little Flower. And I would, if you guys were looking for, I'm sure you already have, so I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but their story is phenomenal. This couple, they're saints, and this is a dad. He was a little bit eccentric. For example, he didn't even sleep with his wife for weeks. He would go and pray in one of his towers. He owned a lot of property. Until finally his priest exhorted him to finally go home and consummate his marriage. Apart from some of their eccentricness, this couple was just beautiful. And the way they succeeded in the marketplace, making luxury watches and lace for the wealthy, and yet raising up children who were saints. It's just phenomenal how real their story is. I mean, there's stories where Louis gets in a fight with the neighbor about the fence, and it's frustrating. And I'm like, this, it's so real. So I would say this is a family that you could really, more families in our parishes need to know about practically. And I'm just thinking very practically. I think the best way to minister to tired suburban dads is to not reinvent the wheel, but keep it very simple. Men are not complicated. We like to go hunting. We like to go fishing. We like whiskey. We like cigars. We like our wives. We like when things are going well. It's so wonderful, and yet so difficult for dads to make good friends. And at my parish here in town, Father Joseph, back in 2020, it felt artificial at first, but he didn't relent. He relentlessly put pressure on the community, and I mean that in the best way, to start small groups. If you were a man and you went to Holy Family, you had to join a small group of other men. No girls allowed, not co-ed. The women could have their groups. The dads coming together in these small groups. I'm in one called Beer in the Bard. We've been meeting for 6 years, where we read Shakespeare and drink wine and beer and talk about Shakespeare. We don't even, it's not a Bible study. It has been a lifesaver, especially through COVID. I'm in another group called Whiskey and Wisdom, where we read literature, drink whiskey, smoke cigars, and just talk. We end up sharing our lives with each other, all these dads. I would say, if small groups isn't a priority in a parish, I don't even know what's going on, because people need to be connecting with each other outside of the context of Mass. Practically, I hope, you know what, I might need to wrap it up here. When I was the DRE at our parish, we moved the Mass times. I was able to get Father to move the Mass times so we'd have enough room in between the Masses for everyone to meet in the narthex for coffee. And our narthex was very big, so we had room. But that Sunday coffee and to have our catechetical programs in between the 2 Sunday Masses changed the culture of the parish, where people didn't just leave right after Mass. They stayed, they had coffee, they had donuts, the kids were running around everywhere. The adults and the children would go to their different programs. It just created opportunities for fellowship, and that's what men need. I apologize that men are missional. I think I'll just end on this, and I'm sorry if it's kind of a shotgun scattered spray approach here, but men are missional, and one of the most successful fundraisers and guys' nights we have at my parish is called Smoker Poker. Here's Matt Frad smoking his beloved cigars. It works because there's no girls allowed. It's fun. Men, we just want to, it's an excuse to smoke cigars and drink whiskey and play poker and have beef brisket. We cater it in. We raise a lot of money for our school. And it's all a fundraiser, and we're kind of winking about that because we're really just having fun, except that it really is a fundraiser. Like, everyone is donating a lot and being very generous, and we wouldn't really want to do it if it wasn't a fundraiser. So I think just bear in mind, men love a good fight. They love a mission. They follow a leader, and give them a job and they'll get it done. And often that's the best excuse for creating friendships. I wish I had time. I started the guild, which was a whole altar servers guild, with hoodies and hats and beanies and swag and a whole culture. But I think practically that's what men need, is just friendship. And I want to give us time for questions. I apologize. We'll skip here to the end. All right. Aaron,
Yes.
sorry for the abrupt ending there.
No, no, no. I love this. This has been great. Thank you so much. I love all your little houses and the themes behind that. So thank you so much. You're a great storyteller, and I think that came across for everybody here. And so I invite all of you on. Please send Tyler questions that you'd like to ask him. We've got a question already here. Can you share more about what your Sunday Mass times were to provide space for the community building? You did catechism classes during this time as well?
Yes. Okay. That's a great question. So when I started there at St. Jerome's, an amazing parish, um, all the catechetical programs were on Wednesday nights, and getting parents to volunteer. We hadn't yet started CGS, which that was another great thing to start. Um, it was just so hard to get people there, and parents would show up. They're a little bit put out. You know how it is. Your parents are bringing your kids everywhere anyway, but they're all coming to Sunday Mass, and so I forget what the original times were. I think we had a 9 o'clock and a 10:15 Mass, maybe a 9 o'clock and a 10:30 Mass. And they were pretty back to back, and afterwards, it was just come and go, come and go. And we moved the Mass, I think we moved to 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock, if I remember correctly. Or no, 8 o'clock and 10:30. I'm not going to be answering your question in a very helpful way. It was enough room where we could have safely an hour and a half in between the masses where people could come out into the narthex. We had coffee, donuts, and then there was a 15-minute gap so that people could move if they had children in programs. And then the adults would bring their coffee and donuts into another room where we would do adult ed. We called them labs. And then every lab we'd have a different speaker, or I would speak, and it was just a wonderful time of fellowship. And if people didn't want to go to a class on a topic, they could stay and linger. And a lot of the moms would, because their kids, you know how it is with kids, like their babies and the nursing, and they would just sit and talk, and the dads, and it turned Sunday mornings from being, rather than being a tomb in between the masses, it just turned it into a never-ending festival that was just, I highly recommend it if you can do it.
That's awesome. It's amazing what some coffee and donuts can do, huh?
Yeah.
And some space to be together. I'm also intrigued when you started talking about small groups in your parish,
Mhm.
um, especially men's small groups. What do you think was the biggest challenge, and what might advice you give parish leaders who might want to start men's groups or are struggling in their parish, maybe not supported? What do you?
Yeah, I think one, knowing who you're working with and having good data on who the members are, who the people that are kicking the tires, maybe considering membership are, knowing who the new dads are. I think women, it might be easier. I don't know. It might be easier for women to form small groups. I'm just thinking of Well-Read Mom and how everybody seems to be my wife is in 2 Well-Read Mom groups plus game night, which is for women who are very enthusiastic about playing games together. It's a very serious evening. She's in a lot of groups. She's in a wine night. For the men, it's hard to pull away. You can feel very guilty, especially if you work out of the home and your wife is not also working. So to leave your wife at home with the kiddos and then to come home and then leave again, that's tough. Men often drag their feet. We've had a lot of dads come and go just because they have to be home with their families on Sunday night or Friday, whenever we're meeting. But father, I think it helps when it comes from the top, or if someone else in leadership has permission from father and the culture's aligned, to really, it's okay if it's awkward, if it's stiff. You just gotta make men join. And at first it was a little bit awkward. I ended up joining this random group called Capen's Men, and ended up not being the right fit for me, but it got the ball rolling. I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I would
Yeah.
say you got to make it happen
Yeah.
in an organized way. Find names, literally pick up the phone. Nothing in ministry, it's easy to hide behind email. We kind of email, and we're like, no one's listening to my messages or reading my emails. No one's reading the bulletin, which is true. So pick up the phone. One of the best things I ever learned was when I was with an archbishop who said, hey, oh, you want this? Well, what are you doing? I was like, well, I've sent out emails. He's like, no. He's like, picks up the phone, makes the call, everything. Just pick up the phone, call up the dads, and make it happen.
Yeah. I've heard that so many times on these webinars, the value and the importance of that personal invite, that personal connection. Thank you for reminding us of that. We got some other questions coming in here. And yes, I will be sharing this with you so that you can share it. Somebody said they'd love for their son to see this. And so, yes, we will have that available for you. Here we go. One of the challenges at our parish is that the pastoral ministry staff is predominantly female, but we have a real need for more intentional men's formation. What
Mhm.
suggestions would you have in navigating that as someone who is not officially in charge at the parish?
Mhm. You know, it reminds me that a lot of parishes have a lot of female leadership on staff, and it does affect the culture. Um, but it doesn't have to be negative at all. In fact, it can be very positive. Um, God has given women amazing temperaments and skills. But you're kind of naming what you're not supposed to say out loud, which is, does it really inspire a lot of like, how do you get the men to step up and go? I'm thinking outside of things like the nights. Um, I would recommend, one of the things we started at St. Jerome's was, it was a program called That Man Is You. You've probably heard of it. It was awesome, but there's many of these kinds of things. But the men woke up every morning, every Thursday morning, and met at 6 a.m. A few of them got up at 4 to start making breakfast for everybody. And we would go through it, and we'd sit in small group tables after we watched this video and discuss. We'd have coffee. It was intergenerational, and it was so organic. So I would say, find a few men that are interested in seeing something happen, a cultural renewal with the men at the parish. I would say mornings is a great time for men, because nights are tough. Everyone wakes up early. Catholic men love to wake up early and work out and do manly things. So getting them together, and what happened from that is, because we were meeting weekly, then Father and others would say, hey, we need help with this fundraiser. Would you guys do a cookout? And so we ended up doing, on Sunday, we'd do a big tailgate. I mean, it's Wisconsin and we were Packer fans. We do a big tailgate before a game and fry up the burgers, and we brought in goats for the kids to pet, and it was all male led, and we loved it. We were so proud. Men love flipping burgers, and they love a mission. So I think getting men together consistently in something like a Thursday morning breakfast or coffee, and then giving them jobs. You don't want to overburden them, but giving them a few fun things,
Right.
that's a great starting point, because now you have a mailing list, you have guys that are plugged in, guys who are excited about doing something, maybe helping with the altar guild. Like, the guild was different from what a lot of people would call an altar guild, and just making things happen. I think that could really help.
So even if you're not a parish leader, you're a man that goes to this parish, your dad, and so you can get a couple friends together and start it that way, and then it can build from there or
Yeah, I
grow from
think,
there.
good leadership, you might not even see the leader, right? So you're kind of working behind the scenes, you're playing chess, you're calling up Bob, then you're calling Steve. You're like, Bob and Steve, get together, let's have coffee, let's make this Thursday breakfast thing start becoming a tradition. And then call up Tim and Frank and say, you guys, I need you to hit the phones and get all the men to come to this. We want a great turnout. Get them to own it. No one knows that Becky was the one who started the men's group. But Becky was the one. She picked up the phone, or she called Lucy and said, I need your husband to do this. Can you make
Right,
sure that he gets excited about it?
right. I love it. Okay, another question here. How have you reached dads who are acting out in unhealthy ways because of the boredom? We're finding midlife crisis behaviors more frequent. We see men who love God and want to honor him, but can't escape the clutches of a multitude of crutches or addictions.
Mhm, mhm. Well, for practically to reach them, I would say they need friends. You know, you go to confession. All of us have probably committed a mortal sin, and you know, Father has some words for you, or you see your spiritual director. But maybe this guy isn't seeing a spiritual director, and maybe he's not going to confession, and maybe the sermons are, water off a duck's back. I would say the best thing, first, pray for them by name, you know, dedicate a decade of the rosary to them and intercede for them. But then also get a friend. This is why get small groups going, because if that guy can get into a circle where they're talking, and men rub off on each other, and virtue is contagious and it's inspiring, and also chastisement and guys calling each other out, it works. It's very effective. But finding a man in isolation and calling him out can backfire pretty bad. I think more principally based, I would say just to recognize, yeah, maybe they are going through something, and marriage is a two-way street, and sometimes people need therapy. They need to find that spark in their marriage again. And maybe it's time for him to find something outside. Maybe he needs to find fresh meaning in his responsibilities, or truly like an adventure that scratches that itch. My wife right now is just laughing at me every night I'm going to bed reading about the history of cigars, and it's completely worthless. And and
you love it.
And yeah, I'm loving it. I love everything about it. I'm getting into hunting. I never used to hunt, and now I can't wait to the next time I can go out there and look for ducks. Like, I don't know if that's answering the question. It's so case specific. I hope that helps frame it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it does. Thank you so much. Well, as our time is getting there here, let's talk a little bit more about Find Your Fight. What led you to write this book? What do you hope it accomplishes?
You know, that's a great question. Find Your Fight here. It's a beautiful paperback, matte cover, creamy pages, serif font. I wanted it to be the kind of book that a man would enjoy getting. I don't like getting dad books. My Brittany doesn't get them for me. This one's different. It's not about parenting. It's not a thesis-driven book where there's a topic and then the next 10 chapters, you know, defend the topic. It's coming at it from, here's a story of how immigrants in Stearns County, Minnesota, brewed whiskey to survive the Great Depression, and the in and outs with the Virgin Mary and their covenant with her through decades in Minnesota. These really cool stories, to complicity and how to pursue a joyful sex life and romance with your wife, to really gut honest stories about how babies broke me. And at the end of every chapter has discussion questions that are designed for small groups. I just really believe friendship will save the world, and men need to get together. And it's hard for men. We're not particularly vulnerable naturally. And so these discussion questions are designed to help break the ice and get guys maybe to admit what they wouldn't admit otherwise, and start talking about some of the real things that they're up against.
Oh, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned the discussion questions at the back of the chapter. Yeah, so excellent. And as we all know, right, Ave's covers are just the best, right?
Oh yeah, yes.
So thank you everybody for being with us today. And as always, we'd like to offer you a little discount. So you can save 20% with code webinar1111 for today's date when ordering at avemariapress.com. Thank you so much, Tyler. This has been delightful. I think your approach and your perspective is very unique, and it really hits home. So I appreciate so much you sharing this with us. And if I can find my cursor, there we go.
Aaron, and guys, thanks for sharing your afternoon with me. I know you're busy, so I appreciate you. I hope this was helpful.
Definitely. And again, you're free to share this webinar with whomever you would like. And I invite you to join us. December 2nd will be the next one, Building Community Around Your Parish Namesake Saint. So Wadeen Koenig-Bricker is going to talk about how we can share simple and accessible ways to integrate our parish's saint into the lived experience of your parish community. Learning how and why the saint was chosen and how it can focus your identity and mission as a parish. So I hope you can join us for that. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Tyler, thank you. Talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye,
Thank you. God
everybody.
bless you.
Bye.